Okay, so let's take it to the next level, everyone. Now that we know how to use a function to print a menu given any list, we have that flexibility. Now let's talk about the other side of it is. So now we have this menu. How do people make a choice from that menu? How do we get them to input their choice, and how do we interpret their choice? Now, if you haven't seen that first video, the one about making a menu with a function, go ahead and watch that first. Otherwise, this is going to be gibberish to you. Okay, so what we want to create, let's look on the right side here where we have our console. What we want to create is a program that looks like this. So let me run it. So it prints a menu. So there's 4 options: fish, steak, chicken, salad. And then it asks the user for a selection. It prompts them, enter your selection. So that's going to be with some kind of input statement. And what we want to have is we want to have the ability not only to make a choice. So say I choose number 1, fish, and then it verifies my choice for me. Thank you for selecting fish. We want something that's not only going to be able to do that. We say choose chicken, and it says chicken. So it does select the right thing. But in addition to that, we want to have it be able to do input validation. So say I choose, first of all, a number that's not in the list. So say I choose 5. We want it to be able to catch that and flag it and send us back to the input so that it doesn't crash the program somewhere down the line. So say I put 0. Okay, still flagged it. Say I put -1. Okay, and in addition, we also wanted to flag it if we enter things that are not digits. So if I enter just kind of generic text gibberish, we want it to flag it as well. Okay, so we want to be able to put in our input validation. So that's what we want our program to be able to accomplish. Okay, so let's take a look at the code here on the left. Okay, so we have, as usual, this is exactly from our previous program. This is the function to print the menu. So given a list, feed it in as a parameter to the function in parentheses. Print menu will take that list and print the numbered list. So that's going to do that right there in the output. So it's going to print the numbered list for us. Okay, now that we have that, how do we get it to read in an input, not only read in an input, but also validate that input? Okay, now if you haven't taken a look at, I had a previous video on an example of how to do that. You might want to go back and take a look at that, because a lot of the concepts that we use here are taken directly from that, carry over directly from that. Okay, so let's take a look at what's going on. So we have a bunch of, now it looks fairly long, but there's a lot of comments. Notice the green is all comments. I tried to comment to give you a clue as to what's going on. So at the heart of it, we have a while loop. While loop to keep checking as long as the input is not going to be valid. Within that while loop, we have a couple of conditionals, if statements, to check, first of all, whether or not it's a number or whether it's just random text. And then if it's a number, whether or not it's in the proper range. Okay, so we're trying to put some good checks in there. So we start off by, first of all, we're going to assign this variable number of items to be the length of our list. My list is called my list. That's going to be the list that has all the menu options in it. Okay, so after we print out the menu, which is the first 3 lines here, lines 13, 14, and 15. So this part right here does the printing out of the menu, and we saw that in our previous example. Now we go into the input validation. So we do a little bit of setup. We set up a variable to keep track of how long the list is, so how many items are in the list. Our selection initially going to make it an empty string, just a blank string, okay? Because at this point, nobody has entered anything yet, so just be a blank string. And then we have our so-called flag variable, this Boolean. Remember, a Boolean is either true or false, and it's a good option to use as a flag to keep track of whether a condition is met or not, conditions are met or not. Call it is valid, and initially we set it to false because haven't entered any input yet, so it's not true that they've entered something valid. Okay, so this is our setup. Now we hit the heart of it, which is the while loop. So the while loop goes for the rest of the code. While not is valid. Okay, so remember the while loop is going to keep repeating as long as this condition is satisfied. So as long as the the is valid variable is false, not is valid. Remember, not is like a negative sign, it reverses it. So if is valid is false, not is valid will be true, and so this condition is satisfied, and so it'll keep repeating. Okay, so if the flag is false, the condition is true, and the loop keeps repeating, keeps asking for input. Okay, so kind of a tricky piece of logic there, so make sure you kind of understand how that works. So once you're in the loop, then you prompt. So this is where we prompt the user, ask for their selection. By the way, just a little tangent here. If you're wondering what that is, that \n, okay, that's a carriage return. That's a new line. So \n is a new line. So that just skips a line, just spaces it out vertically a little bit more nice. So we have our prompt. Enter your selection. We're going to store the answer in selection. So whatever the user types in, we store that in selection. So we hit our first check. So our first check is it a number? So remember we saw this function from before, is numeric. Okay, that's either going to be true or false. It's a Boolean function that tells us whether what's in selection is composed of all digits or whether it has some other letters and characters mixed in there. So first we're going to check whether what the user typed in is a number or not. Okay, if it is a number, then we convert it to an integer. We know it's a number, so we're going to convert it to an integer. That's what int is. In general, when the user types in input, it's going to treat it like a string, just like a random piece of text. So now that we know it's composed just of digits, we can convert it safely to a number. If we didn't do this check, and if it had, say, some letters in it, then we'd get an error and our program would crash. So we're going to, now that we know that it's a number, we're going to convert it to an integer. So we're going to treat it as if it's a number. We call that selection value. And then we hit our next check. So the next check is, now that we know it's a number, is it in the right range? So is it between 1 and however many items are in the list? And so that's where the selection value variable comes in. That tells us how many things are in the list. And so we can set up our condition to check, is it in the right range? So is the selection value greater than or equal to 1 and less than or equal to the number of items in the list? So this second conditional here, this nested, notice it's indented, so it's part of this first condition block here. So it's inside the other one. It's not one right after the other, it's one inside the other. And that's called nesting. So it's only going to hit this one as long as this first one is true. So this first one had to be met in order for it to ever hit this one. So the second conditional checks whether that number now is in the right range. If it is, then we know they've put in something valid. We can go on. So item selected, that's going to be the item from the list that they chose. Okay. You might be wondering, well, why do I do this? Selection value -1. Okay, well, selection value is a number in the list, the menu that they chose. Now remember though that indexing in lists starts at 0. And when we printed out our list, we started it at 1, just so it's a little bit more intuitive for humans to read. So we got to subtract 1 so that it aligns up back with how indexing works. So the first item in the list is actually at index 0. And that's why we do this selection value -1. Remember, selection value is a number that the user types in. And so to use that as an index to get the actual data from the list, we bump it down by 1 to make it align with how indexing works. So this line will actually get the value from the list. It'll store it in item selected, this variable here. So now we know what the user chose. And then we have a print statement to print out and to verify what they chose. So we have a print statement, thank you for selecting, and then item selected. So that'll be what they chose from the list. Okay, and then we set is valid. We set the flag to be true so that the loop is going to exit at this point. This else this is what happens if they put in a number, but it's not in the right range. So say they put in like 10 outside of the range of choices on the menu. So this else is going to happen if they put in a number, but it's not in the right range. So we have a print statement to let them know that. And then finally, we pop out of that block here, we have the else. This else, so you look at the indentation, and you'll notice in the editor, it has these kind of faint vertical lines to help you match things up to see where the indentation is. So this else matches up with this if here, this first if. So this else is for this first if. If it wasn't a number, so if it contained things other than digits, it's going to come straight down here, and it'll print out that your selection must be a number, not something that has just random letters and symbols. Okay, and then once it's through that, then we're done. Okay, so this set of code right here, all of this, starting at line 17, this is for the input, and most of it is for the validation. So your heart of the validation is a while loop to keep asking for input as long as they don't enter something that's valid. Once you enter the while loop, first you ask for a selection, hit the first conditional, check whether it has just digits in it, whether it's a number. If it is, convert it to an integer, check whether it's in the right range. If it is, then you can pull out the value from your list that they chose. If it's not, let them know and keep repeating. If what they entered initially is not just digits, it has mixed in symbols and numbers, then we come straight down here. And it'll print out a warning to them and kick it back around the loop again, and it'll ask them again. Okay, so here's an example of input validation and choosing something from our list.